Have you tried turning off the word option so that you have to write the whole sentence from scratch? I do. You can't do that for these prompts, these specific prompts. And I used to, you're talking about the keyboard thing. These prompts don't have keyboard things. It's only the other way around when you're typing Japanese. And also I do that in practice. But lately I haven't missed anything. So generally I do them during practice. Yeah, that's what you're talking about. Oh, no, you can't, unfortunately. Because imagine if you can type English here. I wouldn't want to deal with the programming with this part. Like, what I mean is, I wouldn't want a native have to deal with finding all the possible combinations of native accepted responses, because then it will probably increase the fail rate and spuriousness. And a lot of people would say, well, yeah, infinite if, and yeah, and then even they could integrate machine learning, but machine learning is also erroneous, right? Because you're talking about vernacular now. You're talking about colloquials, and machine AI don't pick up colloquials as well. So you would have to get to the point where, how do you communicate this idea here, right? The Japanese idea, but while still accommodating the fluidity of the native speaker. And that would be a nightmare. It would be an absolute nightmare. Maybe in the future, AI will be in a manner that you can train it so well that it can be less erroneous in accepting what is acceptable and not. And then you have to contend with, what is the native language speaker's competence, right? So what is their competence level? And if you choose English, we already talked about this so much. English competency has a gigantic range. So then you're going to have to contend with all the naysayers that say, why is my answer incorrect? Right? I'm here to learn Japanese, not be juggled for competency in both languages. So that's kind of my defense on not including keyboard function in the person's native language. Generally speaking, my girlfriend is a lively person, is kind of helpful, because you have no idea. Like, I genuinely have no idea how to express it yet, or like in English. And also, even worse than that, don't forget lost in translation, right? So how do you bridge this? A lot of people would say, just get rid of it altogether. And that's the school of thought for immersion, right? Don't do this at all. Well, Duolingo wants to do this. Duolingo is a translation-based approach. So it's kind of saying like, oh, you like riding bicycles, like, oh, you like biking, right? You enjoy cycling. Well, guess what? If you want to be in my house, you can't ride a bike. That's essentially the argument about immersion versus Duolingo. It's like, well, this is a specific approach. This is an approach. And the attack is usually, oh, this is an ancient approach, or it's less effective, right? Or it's not natural, things like that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, that's understandable, but you're attacking the building philosophy. Like, if you don't like people riding bikes, then let them ride bikes, but you're not riding a bike, so continue driving your cars. It's fair, right? Mutual respect in space. Yeah, program can only do so much. Yeah, it's very difficult. But I do get your point, so I try. Um Here's my 2 cents. This is a game thing, so this is a Duolingo thing. It's not a learning thing. Um you have hearts in Duolingo. Since I'm not a super subscriber. In the future, I'll do this. I'll probably subscribe to super. The reason why is I have a lot of keyboard related things. And oftentimes a keyboard related things slow me down too much. And I don't want to slow down on essence, like on collecting meaning. So a lot of times I'm not the biggest fan on mechanical limitations. And I do make like typos and keyboard and stuff. So there are practice things. So if I'm like really out of practice, as in I keep making grammar errors or vocabulary errors, I will lose hearts. And when I lose hearts, I will go to the practice to get more hearts. And during these practice, you don't lose hearts. So then I practice keyboard entry. And the keyboard entry will help me because I'm obviously messing up vocabulary. Something about my sounding, my visual, how I'm going to do it is preventing me from progressing, right? So that's when this happens. The downside of this is, what if I don't ever get anything wrong, right? Or I don't get more than 5 things wrong. I have the choice to say, I should take more risks. I should go faster. So then I risk making errors, and then it helps me reinforce keyboard. But in the last, I'm going to say the last 21 days, and that's why it feels like I haven't used the keyboard function, is that I haven't missed more than 5 things in the last 21 days. So does that mean my competence is up? Or not? And then then I would worry about, what if I'm under practice? So every 3 days, so now every 3 days I do a total recall where I try. Today is one of those days where I write, I attempt to write in kana, right? I use kana in writing, so I compensate by literally writing the things as opposed to using keyboard function. However, the nice thing about keyboard function is, while writing kana, you have writing errors, right? Writing errors. In keyboard, you have autocorrect. So naturally, my rationale is, if I can write close enough, I can also use keyboard function. The thing that's missing is sentence construction. And I know that's why you probably mentioned it. The concern is, what if I don't see the words, right? What if I don't see the words? And then they're like guiding me on the stuff. Since day 20 and on, when I hear this, I'm not actually looking at the word bank. So whenever it's Japanese or English, I'm actually hearing it first, constructing it in my head. This is when I speak out loud, and then I look at the word bank. On occasion, you'll probably hear me say, I wasn't paying attention to what was being said, and I don't want to read this. I will say something like, I know I can create a sentence from whatever the word bank is. So these are the different ways to adjust for sentence construction. That doesn't necessarily focus deliberately on what's in the word, to introduce different ways. So it goes back and forth. If it's in Japanese, I'll try to, I won't even, actually, if it's in Japanese, I just translate it as quickly as I can. If it's in English, you'll probably see me look up, like my eyes will look up, and I'll try to construct the sentences by saying it. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking about the kana, and then I go to the bottom and look for it. So what happens is it slows me down. So if what I'm thinking it is doesn't match what's in the word bank, then I know that I am thinking of something else that may also work, or I'm on point with Duolingo. So oftentimes it takes me an extra step to look for the things I thought I was looking for. So usually, in my opinion, after watching other people speed run Duolingo, they look for the right answers. As in, it speeds up if you only look for the right answer. It's a lot faster. Although they are already competent in Japanese. People who speed run Duolingo, they're already competent in Japanese. So they're playing it like a game where you can look for the right answers, and I can tell you it's possible. In fact, if you, by the end of day 3, you will know all the prompts. You will know all these prompts. Like all these prompts, you can memorize these prompts. It's a small enough pool. It's a small enough pool that you will know all the answers without listening to any of this or reading any of this. And I totally agree. That is a trap that can happen if you're using Duolingo to learn as opposed to playing a game. If you're playing a game, I know a lot of talented gamers in my life. They're really good at finding what to do to be successful. And they become so efficient that they stop learning new vocabulary. You don't have to learn new vocabulary to complete a Duolingo course. Because if you learn the pattern, you replace words with them, right? You replace the words. Like, oh, this is a noun. I'm only looking for a noun. I'm only looking for this. So whenever the new thing is, you can shuffle it and you can know all the patterns without ever learning anything. And that's what the major criticism for Duolingo is. Thanks, Paige. I am bye. So what happens is I agree with most people. I agree with most people that you can go through 2 or 3 years of Duolingo, and half of the end of Duolingo, like at the bigger end, it will become so habit forming you don't pay attention to half the time. It's like commuting to work. After you do it for a year, maybe even 2 months, you'll stop paying attention to half the things. You are familiar with the pattern of doing it, so you don't need to understand anything else. And in order for me to address this, I know I do this all the time. Like, I play Neverwinter online every single day. And I don't even look at my screen anymore to do like dungeon runs. Like, it, you know, when you see those crazy Souls game people who like do a Souls game blindfolded, you don't need those details anymore. So to me, how I stopped doing this is I would say every month, now officially every 25 days, I'm going to try to do something different so that it forces me to do something that's compensating for another thing. After day 75, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reply. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to try to reply in Japanese, right? Reply in Japanese to whatever they're saying, or at least attempt to. And then what that's doing is I'm going to make commentary in Japanese, but not answering the question or not translating. I'm going to make commentary. So like, for example, I do this in English already to engage myself. This is saying, I guess my girlfriend is a lively person. I could say in Japanese, well, I don't have a girlfriend. Right? So, like, 彼女 konojo ga imasen. Konojo ga imasen, right? Something like that. And the idea is now I'm not just translating, I'm also making commentary in Japanese to something that Duolingo lacks. Duolingo does not encourage you to make commentary or have conversations with yourself. So, not now, but at some point later when I have enough vocabulary, I'm going to keep making attempts in making commentary in Japanese as opposed to English, which I would say, well, not my girlfriend because I don't have a girlfriend, right? But, you know, someone else's girlfriend might be lively. So I could say something like, I don't have the phrase, I'm going to say someone else's girlfriend wa, right? Someone else's girlfriend. And I could look up. Now it'll remind me, how do I express someone else's girlfriend and not my girlfriend, right? So I would say someone else's girlfriend wa genki hito desu. So what happens is now I'm using hybrid things. Every time I hear English is a trigger for me to understand I don't have the Japanese word for this yet. Maybe it'll be interesting later. And I know the rest. So no matter what, I'm still practicing what I know while trying to replace what I don't know, or maybe not. It'll come along. So that's kind of the routine that I'm going to set up in another 10 days. That I don't get too complacent. And that's basically how I play video games. I constantly play video games in that way. When I use a tool, after a month or two, I do something different. If I'm running 1.5 miles, for example, for a month, I'm going to run 1.5 miles a little faster the next day. And the next day, in another month, I'm going to run shorter. So I like that. That's the way to stop the human condition. And that's pretty much what I mean by understanding the human condition. Human condition, I would love to be well read enough to provide like some way to understand that if you understand some things, like it's a fun read. I would highly encourage people to read like things that interest them about human behavior, and then read like a book, like not that sounded so read a book from your an influencer or someone that catches your attention emotionally, and then read about their evaluation of the human condition. Oftentimes it helps, like, oh wait, I do this, so how do I get around it in my own way? And this is how I get around it in my own way. And I don't know if it's apparent through all the recording, and I don't want everyone to have to watch all of it. And so from time to time, every specific milestone, I will try to summarize the things that I do. It's why I go slowly with the semantics. I don't think semantics define someone's intelligence. It's how you go about making meaning and applying the semantics you have. Shrine didn't have to be there. I know, right? Shrine. And it's funny. So I also take notice of what is there and what isn't there. What is there is an opportunity to make commentary, to make a memory stronger. So I already talked about this technique in the first 25 days. I talk about what is the wrong answers, what is not there, and also what besides focusing on what is there. So you also can tell yourself what is wrong with these responses. What can you use with these responses? So even having word bank, you can make the word bank useful. Like, well, how could I incorporate are into this? How could I incorporate want into this? How do you convert this phrase into expressing want? I don't always do that. You can, and it will slow you down even more. But the thing is, you're thinking about other things. Like, how do I make this an isn't phrase, right? Because it's not the right answer, but it should offer inspiration. Like, how do you express this? My girlfriend isn't a lively person. If you need to translate to isn't, right? These many of these things, and it helps solve problems, help you engage things, help you innovate on things you do all the time, right? Your study time is not as focused as mine, so I accidentally fall into those tactics sometimes. Yeah, yesterday I did that, Lotus. Yesterday I demonstrated what it's like to still get all the right answers, but faster. I basically, near the end, it was getting really, really late. Like, I was getting a little tired. So I was like, all right, we're just going to get answers. And you could see that, like, oh, these are the right answers. These are the right answers. These are the right answers. Like, I wasn't even processing anything. Like, there's two choices. It has to be in this order. That has to go first. That has to go second. It's 50-50. It's not even 50-50. It's 100%. So I reminded myself easily that I can blow through all of Duolingo without learning anything from Duolingo. And I absolutely agree with experts or people who are already competent in Japanese that there's no redeeming quality in Duolingo, because they will be very good at looking at the patterns of Duolingo, and other people who are learning could get into that pattern and then stop learning. So is it the fault of Duolingo? No, not exactly. Those people are brilliant. They're just very observant people, right? They're very efficient focused. And that's kind of why I'm worried about. Efficient things doesn't necessarily mean comprehension. It doesn't lead, it's not concordant. It doesn't correlate with comprehension. Understanding and comprehension may be in a different rate than efficiency. So if you're very hyper focused on efficiency, that's why you're kind of toxic to less efficient things. You don't slow down to appreciate the details. Why do people expect your comments and construction, like constructive criticism, to be relevant to someone who's moving at a different pace, right? Go on a drive and tell me and describe all the things you see. I often do this exercise all the time when someone says they went for a walk. Please, like, enjoy your life, right? Tell me 2 or 3 things that's interesting that you remember that left an impression on you when you come back from the walk. Actually, Indy is here. You probably remember Indy. Like, you mentioned walking, and probably the first thing I would ask you is, hey, did you notice anything that was interesting? Because sometimes life passes you by very fast if you're focused on efficiency, and sometimes it actually lowers your comprehension and your observational skills when you work too close to efficiency. I get efficiency is great, and I get people's time are precious, but your life's time, regardless of what you do, is incredibly precious when you make it precious, not how you make it precious. Like, when you make it precious, you can do it anytime. It's great. Human mind dilates time and it contracts time, while in the physical objective hyper-objective world, time moves at the same pace. But to a human being, psychologically, time can dilate and contract because the way you process things can go at a different rate per unit time, right? What are you saying? Oh, wait. Oka no. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Oka no Hanoji. Oh, Mocha. Interesting. I mean, Hoka. Wait. Oh, sorry, Hoka. Hoka. Is that the expression for, like, someone else's? Oka? Oka no Kanoji wa. Okay. Oh, I also, just so you know, Indy, you mentioned the whole, like, you mentioned that the whole like wa at the end expression, you know, the wa, like this wa expression, right? When I was reading the thing on e particles, it led to an example that uses the wa expression. I get what you mean. Where like if you know, so how does this relate to the wa expression? There are expressions where you use the e particle and it's already implied what comes after. So they would end the expression, right? And I finally understand why lots of expressions end with wa or something, because there's enough context that you're inferring the rest, right? And that happens a lot, and especially the expression that you I forgot who mentioned it, about like and you, right? And you, that also is inferring the rest because of context. So the e particle at the end of these things also elicits the same type of motivation as, yeah, like the anatawa, yeah. As opposed, you're off to bed, almost midnight here. Enjoy watching. Thanks, Leon. Good night. Enjoy resting up. I would love to hear all your Japanese things that are interesting to you, or when you're learning Japanese again or something and reviewing. Definitely share something about your experience. It'll certainly help you remember whatever is interesting to you. Thanks for hanging out, Leon. I find myself doing the same thing in math or physics as well. I'll find a pattern, rush through the exercise without actually understanding the concept of what I'm... Yeah, and you're being efficient. So you have for me to encourage someone to want to understand it, I personally ask questions to that person and see if they care. So what I mean by that is, if I asked you, hey, so you did this math exercise, can you teach me something from the math exercise that you just did? And then those are the things that you care about. However, if you go back and say like, well, I was just doing it to get it done, it tells me that, okay, that's not important to you. It's not important for you to comprehend unless you start expressing something like, oh man, I really want to get this. I really want to get this. And I'm like, well, can you tell me something that you learned from the exercise? And then maybe they'll remember certain things. And then I will reinforce like, what about the other things? So how would you get yourself to pay attention to the things you're not remembering, right? And that kind of helps with developing importance and attachment to those things. And oftentimes I would get the person to teach me those things or tell me those things, because ultimately if you can tell me what you remember, you're doing way more than just remembering the content. You're understanding the content. If you can't explain it to me, it's natural for the person who's trying to explain it to be a little bit curious on how to explain it. And in order to explain it, you need to understand it. So oftentimes when someone says, oh yeah, I just got a 700-day streak, it's like, well, what did you do today? Can you explain to me some of the details of what you did today on your 7th-day streak? And that is good enough, in my opinion. A lot of times when you're asking the right questions, it's enough. So oftentimes when I'm thinking about learning Japanese, I keep saying, when am I going to get more questions? As in, when am I going to get more grammar points to form questions? Because ultimately, I could seem like a very active listener, in my opinion, and a very considerate listener, even in Japanese probably, if I listen and ask a question. Listen, ask a question. I don't need to be a genius or a knowledgeable person to appear like I'm invested in the other person. In fact, I gain a lot by asking questions. It also makes the other person feel important. I don't need to feel important. This is a really, really weird humble brag, but I much rather have the other person feel important if they're worried than myself, because generally speaking, I'm not really gaining much from making myself feel important. Usually I'm trying to get all the knowledge from the other person. So if that person can explain to me something and they're learning something about themselves, I benefit from whatever they're learning. So farming people, it's a win-win. That's how I really approach it. When this doesn't work, when this falls apart, is when the person takes it personally. So I try to get ahead of this sometimes, because it might feel like an interrogation. Interrogation. And my explainer for why it feels like an interrogation is thinking about how to explain something is exhausting. Right? It's incredibly exhausting. So if the person says, I'm too tired for this, which I get a lot, like, oh, okay, well, I'll let you be. Like, thank you for your time. My goal genuinely is, if you get someone to explain something to you, it will be exhausting, but ultimately it will increase their comprehension of whatever is important to their lives. And you can kind of say that's like a Socratic method, right? Socrates kind of popularized this. However, then you can integrate like behavioral psychology to be like educational or like encouraging and whatnot, it back into the Socratic method, right? This is a bit like the Socratic method, where you ask the right questions in order to create an environment that person must then elicit comprehension in order to make them learn from themselves, right? And the most powerful thing about this from a behavioral standpoint is that person has full ownership of what they said. As in, it's extra rewarding because they solved the problem. They comprehended the thing. They weren't being handheld. Like, it might seem less like hand holding. I'm not here to tell you what the solutions are, right? I'm here to encourage you to do that yourself. I mean, it works, but if someone were to ask me to break it down and explain what I'm doing, I'd be stuck. Yes, you can be stuck. So you can determine from a person who's asking a question, you can determine when to intervene. And what we're trying to compare it to is comparing it to someone who just assumes or presumes things. What are your rate of success in presuming things versus responsive, right? It's kind of a flaw in the grading system in school, in my opinion, because a person who studies efficiently, like you said, and only focuses on recognizing patterns in how questions are asked and often have better chance of getting a good grade than someone who takes his time to fully, yes. So I agree with you, actually. I took what was valuable about grading systems, right? About grading systems. I'll call it formal education is usually the phrase I would use. Formal education. And then now I'm outside of the formal education. So now I'm trying to gather experience communicating to people that typically is outside the formal education system. And the things I'm describing now is an integration of the formal education system and I don't know what you call this, the subjective, it's like subjective, individualized stuff with formal education. Right? So it's humorous because, oh, this is gonna be a digression point. We're gonna invest in this. This this topic is this topic is very fun to talk about. So, outside, since I stopped being in a university setting, there are a lot of trends that formal education cannot adopt very quickly. A formal grading system, the system takes a very long time to adjust because you have to standardize it across everything, and it takes a very long time to have that. So being outside of the formal education system, you get a chance to be at the front. However, it also means all the stuff you do is constantly changing. A formal education system, like a grading system or a standardization, can't constantly change willy-nilly, right? It can't change year after year after year. That will be like not having a formal grading system anymore. So that's one of the limitations. Standardization slows adaptation. So here, the reason why I'm saying I am not a professional or a formal educator is largely because I do not obey standardization. It's the stuff that I'm gathering experience on is going to change from month to month, year to year, whatever. Suddenly a trend could happen, and that's what's happening. So most of the advice I have now will probably change in the future. Or like the stuff that I'm doing, not the advice I'm giving implicitly. I don't give people advice. I'm not offering advice on this stream. I'm offering, if you observe me and there's anything that I do that is interesting to you, you are free to ask me why I do those things. I rarely ever do something because there's no point to them on stream. When I'm off stream, it's boring, or like, it's not boring, but it's cathartic to me. I meditate when I'm off stream. How do I meditate? I play Neverwinter Online without thinking about whatever I'm doing on Neverwinter Online. I perform at 99 percentile without ever thinking about it. That's a meditation state. It's a state where I do not apply myself in any way except giving the comfort feeling of routines that I have. So I don't want to give people the impression that I'm like this wired every day. On stream, whatever's recorded is how I approach things so that I don't end up like that, where I'm hyper focused on one or the other. Like, am I worried about getting a 99.9% accuracy on Duolingo, whatever that may be? No, I'm not. In fact, when I start to see that I'm focusing specifically on something else, very predominantly, I will remind myself to incorporate something new, because I like to constantly keep myself dynamically flowing. And I usually put an artificial timer or frame at 1 month. 1 month, I start to think about something new. Like, during that month, I slowly brainstorm about things that I gotta swap up. The ultimate goal is still the same, right? This is the idea of my pedaling. This is kind of a little pedaling. The whole idea of goal-oriented study versus process-oriented. You hear this very often, but not using these words. I'm going to tell you now. If you look at your influencer, and there's an interview with an influencer who is very successful at learning things, they're going to phrase it differently. And I'm going to clarify here for my own sake what I mean by goal-oriented and process-oriented. If someone is saying, when, how long until fluency, this is goal-oriented learning. As in, if a video says something like, become fluent in 30 days, use these methods, that's goal-oriented. It's appealing to goal-oriented people. Process-oriented people will have some sort of statement like, I don't really focus on getting good. Well, I made mistakes. I make mistakes. It'll work out. If I put in the time, I will continue to learn, right? It's not about how much you learn in a static time. By when are you going to do something, right? By when are you going to achieve something? So the reason why I don't offer or talk about goal-oriented mechanics is that's what the grading system is. When you have standardization in formal education, you have roadmaps, right? Standardization in a traditional grading system is focused on projection. So like, not like emotional projection, but projection of one's progress. So like by high school, you should know all these things. By college, you should know all these things. Various skills must be met at a specific time. There's plenty of that. Plenty of that. It's so ironic because the people who say, oh, don't worry about universities, like forget about universities. I learned all this with university. Meanwhile, the YouTube algorithm and the way they sell and how to do things, they're replacing formal education. In my opinion, they're replacing formal education with goal-oriented task. That is what formal education does. Like, hey, follow my 1 year step program, and by 1 year, you will become a millionaire. Follow my 3-day program and you will get to conversational level in target language. This is formal education, but now it's nebulous because none of this on YouTube is standardized. You don't get standardization when there are tons of people offering goal-oriented content. So I don't focus on this. There's plenty out there. If you want someone who is gonna tell you like it takes 1 year to do this, it takes 2 years to do this. I spent 30 years, I spent 60 months, or etc. I spent 1,000 streak learning this. That is goal-oriented thing. That's the new age, in my opinion, the new age goal-oriented thing. Non-standardized grading is the new age thing. So now we have two big schools of thought here. We have formal education, naturally behind the times because standardization takes a very long time. Then we have the gigantic internet worth of goal-oriented, non-standardized grading. They capitalize on non-standardized grading in order to adjust for your amount of progress. Like, oh, I was following this guy managed to do it by 100 days, and they said if I followed the steps, I would get it by 100 days. It's like, oh man, but I'm falling behind. So is that me? Is that my problem? Is that their problem? It's both your problems. It's not standardized. There's no standardization. There's no body or pool of fixed, rigorous, double-blind, statistical backing. It takes a really long time, and if it's not in formal education, it's most certainly not in goal-oriented selling online. So that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that they're bad or anything. People are passionate, they want to help people. I would advise, in my opinion, encourage voluntarily. This is my personal take. So if I had an advice to give voluntarily, I would encourage the person to find the standardization. So what is standardization? Well, if there are no standards anymore, right? How can I help someone on finding adequate advice if all the majority of advice online is goal oriented? How can I help someone find standardization? Encourage them to learn about themselves. How do you learn right now? How do you learn right now? What makes you angry about learning? What demotivates you about learning? The more of these answers you can answer, you're going to find your standard. And then you can take that standard and find the person that matches your needs. So this is the Socratic method that I'm talking about. I want to ask people the empathetic questions, right? I'm trying to gather as much information as I can about them and ask them questions so that they realize, yeah, Duolingo is not for me. Like, for the very following reasons. Oh, hey, Anki is for me for the very following reasons. I don't care what, like, to me, it's secondary for what you learn from Duolingo, like the semantics. Whatever language you're learning in Anki is independent. And I've got a lot of pushback on this all the time. It's like, well, it depends on the language. Yeah, it depends on like what you're doing and stuff. It's like, the first step is knowing what those dependencies are. I'm literally saying it doesn't depend because you already know what it depends on, right? So you ask the questions that help someone explore what do they need to learn Japanese. Have you asked yourself, what do you need and how do you need it, or what are you going to do to get Japanese into your skull? Me, I like Lotus's compliment. I think it's one of the bigger compliments that I've had in my life, where Lotus mentioned, I'm not sure if he was mentioning in the same context, but someone, Lotus mentioned something like, it's nice that I'm confident, how confident I am about screwing up and learning something. I'm confident that I know myself well enough that I can get myself to learn Japanese. I know what I'm looking for and what my vision of how to become competent in Japanese, not when I'm going to achieve it. How far down is it? What people think of my Japanese? None of that is within my control. I know enough about myself that I can keep myself entertained regardless of what the tool is. If Duolingo gets boring, I'll make Duolingo interesting for me. If Anki gets boring, I'll make Anki interesting for me. I'm always reviewing things because it's interesting. Nothing becomes disinteresting. So I don't ever worry about getting demotivated because I will find other sources of motivation, and that's usually the answer. I've been around standardization for so long that now I'm exploring everything else. So the goal here, the irony here is, the goal is you have so much. What is available to you? Like Duolingo, for example. What is available to me using Duolingo? I see it. Now, what can I do with it? What can't I do with it? And how do I add or fix whatever it is, right? And it doesn't have to be the developers because I have no access to developers. If I can't fix Duolingo, I go find something that helps it, right? So you have the YouTube universe of goal-oriented things. Ask yourself, what are you going to take? So this is a buffet table, right? This is a la carte. What combination of all the richness of all these people who spend timeless hours, what special combination of goal-oriented content is going to get you to your standard, whatever way you learn, to reach your goal with a good meal, right? With a good meal for your brain, for your body. So that's kind of how it works. For me, my content is to do something to focus on the thing that's lesser, because why else make content, in my opinion? It's not pragmatic to make content that overlaps with a lot of people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pragmatic hurdles in the way to do this. When you're doing process-oriented learning, right? Or process-oriented anything, how are you going to do process? Well, there are some brilliant people who do like 30 days in 15 minutes edits of their own experience, right? And yeah, that's a great way to compromise between the format, right? The format. And I don't want to do that. So yes, the hurdle now is that everything I do in order to illustrate process-oriented learning, you have to actually do all of it. And is all of it important to me? It kind of is. However, there are plenty of people who have lots of resources. If you want to have process-oriented learning, like try to get some of that exposure of what process-oriented learning is like. The key words would be something like, I reviewed something, so you don't have to. So these are like key phrases that you can pick up on someone who's more focused on the process, as in they're using their time and they're going to tell you as much as they can in that time. And things like 30 days in 15 minutes, 100 days of things, here are my thoughts, and it's still very long. They end up being like, they're not even 15 minutes. They can be 30 to 3 hours even. And I can't even summarize 25 days of Japanese from Duolingo in like 8 hours, right? So I'm not very good at that. I'm so terrible at trying to simplify things. But there are individuals out there who do process oriented learning, and that's the people who say like, here's my progress over 200 days and what I've learned over those 200 days. So if you're interested in people who may be like that, those are the key words, right? Oh, I spent here's my 1 month early review of a product. I spent 1 month with this product. Even the more popular people, like for technology and stuff, like MKBHD, he does these things. Like, I used this as my daily driver for a whole month. Here are my thoughts. Those are process-oriented people. When people are selling you something, they're goal-oriented. Like, hey, do you want to get good in Japanese in 1 month? That is goal-oriented. It's appealing to your goals. So you have to ask yourself, is it more important to know the goal? Or is it more important to get a general idea where it can guide your feelings or things that you want to keep in mind during whatever the goal is? So most of the time, my preference is geared towards these types of videos, because I want someone to tell me why it's valuable when they spend timeless hours. So my goal is also that I want to summarize as much as I can, but tell you that it takes a really long time to come up with these samples, as opposed to a cross edit that appeals to some goal that everyone wants. And you guys probably already know that goal-oriented content versus, if you're looking at goal-oriented content versus process-oriented, one is more than the other. This is bigger in number because it's more efficient, right? It's easier to make. When I mean by easier to make, as in more efficient to make. So the number itself is higher, and the incentives for making these is higher incentives. So generally, goal-oriented content outnumbers process-oriented content at least 10 to 1. For every 10 videos that is going to tell you, you need this. Something you haven't done before, but do this. Do this, but not that. Start now, and you will get to this. There's so many of that, right? This is cost effective. It's also cost effective. It's also very lucrative as well. And then this is time consuming, personal sacrifice. You can't even juggle a social life a lot of times. Like those people, they effectively have to consume their personal life to make those things. And obviously, we're not talking about liars. Like, I know this came up yesterday about liars. We're not talking about you have to know the red flags for liars. Like, people who pretend to understand the goals, people who pretend to. We're talking about the earnest people who do this. Pragmatically, you can't argue against this. It's too time consuming. Process oriented is too time consuming. So that means it's already guaranteed that that person has to maximize whatever they're spending their time on. So it's not the same as goal oriented. Process oriented, they've already spent a large majority, like lots of their time. So their statements and stuff will be very heavy and refined and all or none kind of thing. Like, I spent the last 3 months spending 6 hours doing this. Here are my thoughts. Those create weight, and you don't get many of this. It doesn't mean they're less important. It is really difficult, right? It's very difficult. So I love when I see these things, but at the same time, you got to ask yourself, what are you looking for? If you're having lifestyle issues, in my opinion, like if you don't like the habits you have, like lifestyle stuff, habit stuff, diets, fitness, dealing with lifestyle stuff, look, in my opinion, look for process-oriented keywords. If you're looking to like have a hobby or getting a quick fix, learning casually, you probably use goal-oriented. I know that sounds counterintuitive. A lot of people think like, oh yeah, but I was following this super genius polyglot that can speak 10 languages. This is the long game. It's like, well, what is their content like? It's like, oh, they're telling me to do this and this and I'll be fluent by 1 year. That's goal-oriented things. You're doing it casually. This is casual. If you're quote unquote, a lot of times people use the word serious. If you're serious, eventually most people find their way to process-oriented learning, because this is the long haul, right? So are you in it for a quick fix? Is it important to you to be good at something, right? Or is it really, a quick fix? If it's important for you to be good at something, you're looking for process-oriented stuff. If you're looking for a quick fix to be a casual, to be involved in the community and not really join them, but these are the contents I would probably recommend. Because they'll tell you fast fixes, efficient fixes, how to get the 80-20 rule. 80-20 rule, fast fixes, and the idea of fast fixes, some people talked about yesterday. They brought up some names. I looked them up, and sure enough, it's true. The person that was talking about how they spoke lots and lots of languages, it's a hustle. It was a hustle. That's why it's very frowned upon, because goal-oriented content is incentivized to be hustling, as in they have to compete with each other. It's about speed. It's about efficiency. You can measure all these things. I learned something in 30 hours. That took you to learn something in 3 months. My way is better. Process-oriented, they don't compare anything. Honestly, there's not even enough time to compare anything. You're not even thinking about your goal. You're thinking about doing the thing. So if I ever give people the impression, some people ask me about what my goals are all the time, right? Like, I think the most common question that approaches me a lot of times is, what's your goal? Are you planning to visit Japan? Are you planning to become fluent in Japan? I think 90 to 100% of the questions, and I may be really, really close to 100. I think even all the people that I've met, privileged to meet, wonderfully understanding, they are still probably goal-oriented people. So the first comment when they saw me was probably something like, why are you learning Japanese? What is the purpose of you learning Japanese? I'm like, well, why not? It will breathe new experiences into my life, whatever it may be. I have no expectations of where this is going to take me, However, I am certainly enjoying it. And when I find myself moderately demotivated, I will change it all up and still continue to do the thing. So, this is when I'm streaming. So when I'm like off stream, I know that I must eat today, right? I must meet my caloric and nutritional requirements. I must run for a specific amount of time. So outside the stream, yeah, I'm very goal oriented. On stream, not really. Streaming is a way to the thing that makes streaming very organic and natural is you don't make it a checklist, right? In my opinion, the most earnest, a lot of people use the word genuine comes up too. Oftentimes, to become naturally genuine, or as well as seriously genuine and charismatic, is to not restrict what you're going to do live. You have YouTube for that. So if you're a person who likes goal-oriented stuff, you set goal-orient, do long format content, because there is way too much noise in live streaming. You're here for the process, the journey of joining someone's experience, not cutting out all the noise. If you cut out all the noise, you're selling something. You're goal oriented, and by selling, I mean you're persuasively presenting a case for a goal. If someone asks me, "Is my goal Japanese fluency?" my answer is, if it happens, that's cool. If it doesn't, I haven't thought about it. Like, so I've had the privilege of having both seen a goal-oriented, successful language learner, a very popular one, right? Language learner, and a incredibly successful process-oriented language learner as well. Right? And you know what they differ? Well, this is how I became exposed to them. I was looking for reviews of Duolingo, right? Because I need to know where is the perspective of all my critics are coming from. The vast majority of my critics have the opinion of this successful goal-oriented language learner. The ones that I haven't told them who they were, but there is a chance they might have encountered. The people who I find very reasonable and communicate, they probably take and be more open to the perspective of these various ones. And I would classify, sort of loosely classify, there are at least 3 viral ones that when they review Duolingo, their language, use case, critiques, talk about what part of a journey, what part of the process Duolingo has. And in that scape, it's worth it. The people that I get most of the time, because remember, 10 to 1, right? So your exposure, mere exposure, would say that even by chance, random chance, it's this side, where someone's going to say, well, if your goal is to be fluent, don't use Duolingo. And these people are also very successful, by the way. It's 2 different successful people, 2 different perspectives. Ask yourself, my challenge to you is ask yourself, who do you benefit from more? Are you the left, or are you the right, or you're a little bit in between, so you kind of want to mix and match? You got to find your standardization. You got to find the person that may be more experienced than you. You got to know what you're looking for. And my advice, I get advice from process-oriented people because I am largely a process-oriented person. I don't get my advice from goal-oriented successful learners. What does a goal-oriented successful learner look like? It looks like 2 or 3 of the polyglots that were mentioned yesterday. They are focused on succeeding in something. How do I hold a conversation in Spanish? Here's what I need to learn. How do I hold a conversation in 10 different languages? Here are all the things to have a casual conversation to make it look like I know how to have a casual conversation. These are goals. Process oriented, I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 years, however long I want. I'm going to continue. I started something, it doesn't have an end. This is process oriented. When someone says, how long, someone asked me yesterday, how long do you think it will take me to finish Duolingo Japanese course? I'm like, okay, that's a fair question because technically Duolingo has an end for now. My answer, the longest answer is it's never going to end. There's no end for anything I learn. Duolingo will forever be part of my Japanese learning experience. So even if I move on to Anki, Duolingo will be part of that memory. I don't complete something and forget it. It's part of the journey. You don't get to, in my opinion, it's wasteful. I'm going to use the word. It's wasteful for someone like me to say, oh, I used up this time. Now it's not useful anymore. Romaji is not useful anymore because I only used it as a crutch to get to somewhere. I don't think of it that way. If you're goal oriented, you can think of it that way because anything that's not related to your goal is not important. You throw it out. You discard anything that doesn't get closer to your goal. So the question is, what does that review look like? These people look for the do's and don'ts, or like the things that it does have and the things that don't. These people sell you on what they want to look at, what they want to see. Usually what they want to see that are important, right? They're selective to their goals. What is important to their goal? They'll see those and not anything else because that's part of their goals. So that's what happens. If you see me, I'm using Duolingo, the person criticizing me is saying, this is a Duolingo guy, so they must only use Duolingo because from the goal-oriented content, people who are on Duolingo are stuck on Duolingo. That's actually statistically correct. The vast majority of people who start with Duolingo don't branch out from Duolingo. They get emotionally attached, they get rudimentary feedback, and they get stuck on there. That's the app. That's what app design does. So it tells me that a vast majority of Duolingo users are unaware of this. They are not understanding their own standardization, their own motivation, the needs that they require. If you do understand that, I will go and look for another app that can beat Duolingo in that. Can Anki beat Duolingo in the thing these people need? The answer is no. It is a gigantic no. If you can't get someone to learn something with Duolingo and you remove the thing that's keeping them using Duolingo and recommending something that doesn't provide that, the answer is no. They will not adopt that. One thing you can do is scare them. Scare them, which is a tactic that most people use, away from their goal. So first they ask, oh, do you want to become fluent in Japanese? Stop using Duolingo. That's scare. That's a fear. That's fear tactics. And it's goal-oriented fear tactics. What does this sound like? I would ask them, what makes you want to use Duolingo, my friends? What is interesting about Duolingo that makes it? Well, you know, I kind of like the shriek system and the leaderboard. Like, well, if I told you that I will give you a schedule with Anki, right? and then pretend like they're goals. Maybe I'll give you a pat on the back or something to reward you, and I gave you a schedule of what you need to cover in Anki, right? Would you be willing to do that? It's like, well, yeah, it's kind of like Duolingo reminding me to do my lessons, and you give me something for it, and it's like, okay, let's do that. And then what happens is you integrate what Duolingo does for this person and get them to use something that a goal-oriented person keeps saying it's fundamentally better. Like, well, no, it's not. It does something that Duolingo doesn't do, and you think it's better for that reason. You are so narrow-minded that you do not contribute to integrating the thing that keeps them on Duolingo. So for me, if I were to encourage someone to show them the way of Anki, I would use what they already know how to do and then incorporate the Anki stuff and let them decide. They will naturally become aware of what is better or what's not, because you're establishing two different habits, right? So that's kind of a big thing, and I totally neglected Sub-Zero. Let me see. Part of the reason I can't wait to be fully done with my master's. I really enjoy all the material, but I don't feel like I have enough time to fully grasp it at a comfortable pace within each semester. I see. So I end up doing the efficient method and focus on recognizing patterns instead of actually learning. Yeah, that can be... If you learn enough to be happy and satisfied, it sounds like maybe you might not be happy or satisfied. Sometimes efficiency saves time to make time for the things you care about. You know what I mean? Like, so I imagine there are other important things that you're saving time for. So that's why you choose to make efficient choices with some of your university things in order to make time for things that you may find very important, right? I once asked someone how long they've been learning a language, and I was told that it was like asking a woman how old she is. I guess that person was a bit goal-oriented and embarrassed to admit how long they had been at it. My take on that is, yeah, you're right. I actually would lean towards that, because if you ask me how long I've been learning a language, I would ask you back, it's like, why do you think there's a time? Like, why is time relevant to learning a language? So, like, why is it even important? I would ask back. It's like, and if you say, well, it's important for X, Y, and Z, then I'll give you a time, right? Sub-Zero, like, because I need to understand how important is it to you that you need to know how long I've been learning a language. Because the real answer is, I'm still learning the language until the day I die. The language you use, the language you care about, you learn language until you die. The answer is, it's irrelevant how long it is. However, if you say, oh, because I want to know when you started, like you can express something like, I want to know how long someone has been, like where their starting point is. And then I want to give an idea of how long they expect to continue doing that. Then I'll give you a time, because I know that it gives me the impression that it is important to you. If it's not, then I would probably give you a rhetoric and say, why does it matter how long I've been learning a language? It shouldn't matter to you either, because you're going to use it for the rest of your life, right? Hopefully. If it's not right, then we're on a different page, so we can determine how we differ, right? How we differ on that page. And let's see. I'm embarrassed to admit how long that has been at. I didn't really see it that way. I was more interested in how long they've been invested and interested in learning it. Yeah. Either that, or perhaps be afraid to be judged by other people. Yes. Who are goal-oriented, right? Because goal-oriented means that there's a way to judge, right? Judgment comes from standardization. If you don't have any standards, how do you judge anything? Right? This is logic. I'm obviously applying logic now, as opposed to like philosophy or anything. In order to judge something, you need a standard. So where do you get standards? Goals. If they have to be goal-oriented to have standards. If you ask someone that is without goals, their first question is, why does it matter? So, so if you ever get this is my conversation a lot of times. Someone asked me like, so how long did it take you to get your PhD? I'm like, it took me 7 years. It's like, oh, I was told that it took about like, yeah, that sounds about right, 4 to 5 years. And like, I mean, it could have taken me 12 years. I absolutely loved my work environment, but it wasn't pragmatic, right? Like I had an unhealthy relationship with my PhD. That's why I stopped. And also, people have standards. The university have standards, right? They have to meet a standard. At the time, it's usually between 4 years ideally and 7 years max. So so I was at the max because I wasn't concerned, and my mentors were. That's why my mentors were important to me, because I wasn't concerned when I was done. It's never done to me. Like, there's no end to being a scientist, right? It never ends. It still hasn't ended. I'm still not in science, but all that stuff never ends. So, but you got to have standards. That's pragmatism. And in the professional world, jobs get done with standards. Jobs get done with goals. So if you're a hobbyist, one of the defining lines between a job and a hobby is job has goals. Hobby, in my opinion, don't have goals. Otherwise, in my opinion, psychologically, you will drain all the passion out of your hobby. The hobby will get wrecked by expectations, standardizations. You will stop painting something because the standard is too high for you. You'll stop enjoying and observing all the nooks and crannies, all the errors you make, how to turn those errors into nice things because standardization told you they're wrong. So one of the biggest distinctions between a hobby and a job is one is goal-oriented and one isn't. If you ask, I watched a really adorable collab between two of the random people that I used to watch. Magnus, the rock climber Magnus, Magnus Meatball, and PewDiePie, right? PDP, and the thing they discussed was rock climbing. And Magnus presented the question to PewDiePie, he's like, why don't you do this rock climbing? Why don't you produce this rock climbing thing as a channel? And PewDiePie answered and said something so remarkable that's reflection in this. I want to keep something to myself. Like, if I make this into a channel, this would end up becoming a job. I'd be obligated to meet standards. I need something to myself where I can just feel it out, process oriented it, like enjoy the journey. That's what I mean. Like, there's a time and place for these things. So, is learning language a job to you? Does it give you reward? Does it give you credibility? Stick with goal-oriented thinking, for sure. Have you asked me what I think of Japanese? It's not a job. I'm not here to become fluent in Japanese. I don't have to be fluent. I don't have the goal of doing that. And I'm very happy because it's a hobby. Hobbies are incredibly happy. Like, if you're kicking yourself and saying, "Oh man, I'm just not getting as good," it's no longer a hobby, dude. For the sake of your mental health, if your hobby is causing you negative stress over and over again, it's no longer a hobby. It's a job. And that distinction can help a lot of people, because then they can go and rediscover their hobbies. Every 30 days ish for Japanese learning with Duolingo, I'm trying to redefine my hobby. As in, I'm trying to do something to remind myself how wonderful it is, how new it is, how refreshing it is. A job, you're in it for 4 or 5 years, same thing. maybe slightly iterative. And even in like a really highly intellectual thing like science 90% of the time is still same and iterative, like wet work, data analyses. So you're building on something that's incredibly standardized. So if you're unhappy about something, enjoy the process a little bit more. If you think you're slacking off too much and you need more structure, you might want to treat it more like a job, like be a little bit more firm. But the idea is you're striking a balance between the two. Some goals, some process, right? And you get to define where that job and hobby line is. It still comes down to somebody's going to say, it depends on the person. It's like, yes, it does depend on the person. But if the person knows what they need, right? If they're self-aware of what they know they need, they determine where they are. So no, it's independent, in my opinion. Humbly so. It's independent if the person is self-aware enough, right? They can go find wherever it is. And that's where, in my opinion, the confidence comes from. If you're always constantly worried that, oh, am I going to screw up? Am I going to be filled with regrets? Well, if you know what you need, just confidence and lack of regret follows suit. And many of the conversations between successful YouTubers and content creators that are constantly not in the scandals and deception and stuff, their first thought is, yeah, it's hard to even think about regret. Like, people don't, like, you don't do things to be regretful about it. It's kind of weird. Like, why spend so much time worrying about regret and waste? If you're worried about time already, man, spending all the time to deal with regret and waste, that's even more time lost. So, yes. Anyways, that's a wrap up. Enjoy life, find where your goals are. But I can tell you now, I am making content that isn't available on YouTube because I enjoy it. It's nice to think outside the box. But at the same time, I only need to go to YouTube to get reminded of all the other things. So it's an excess. So I don't like doing things that are in excess. Like, I prefer to talk to all the people who are. And I think the vast majority of people I've encountered over learning Japanese are goal-oriented people. And that's fantastic. They're young, goal-oriented people as well. Passionate, fast, talking about streaks, talking about like how extraordinary they are. That's very youthful and it's very vibrant. And I'm old and very process oriented. So yeah. I'm just imagining them telling you, all right, we gotta wrap this up. Yeah, we gotta wrap this up. Actually, that's kind of funny because the person that I like, Lost in the Pond, he makes that stuff joke all the time during his videos. He's not a live streamer, but he makes a sort of long formatted content. And he keeps always referring to his director, his producer / director. It's like, well, yeah, no, Lawrence, like, you're taking too much time to cover this. Like, he does that. And when you say, all right, it's time to wrap this up, it's kind of like the self-talk that he does all the time. And I do that a lot too. In my mind, I'm keeping track of the amount of time that I'm using because I wanted to get at least an hour. I want these digressions to be at least an hour. So yeah, I'm wrapping it up now actually. But thank you for the opportunity to express this. Although I wasn't as good as wrapping it back to the original, where do we actually start? It's probably about detail-oriented things, right? Oh, I know where it started. The whole idea of trying to do something with a tool, right? There's no keyboard function here for this. It all starts there. Well, if there isn't a keyboard function here, you can create it in your head. If this is forcing you to do something, challenge yourself to do something else in the middle. Just like yesterday's message, be better than the tools, right? Because you're a human being. You're more creative than the tool. Someone called me a tool yesterday, which was really funny. It's a dad joke. Is Duolingo good for learning a new language? How do you learn a new language right now, Koi? How do you learn a new language now? Is this your first time? Would this be your first time? If you were to use Duolingo, Koi. I think it's definitely worth considering how you learn new things. The short answer is I can probably summarize quickly, Koi, if Duolingo is good for learning a language, for specific people. Some things that Duolingo can help with is if you lack structure. So if you're a person who needs structure, so if these are some of your needs for learning a language or learning things in general, not just a language, if you need structure, so that means you need these things. So you lack structure, consistency, maybe motivation. These are big ones. Consistency, motivation, and lack of structure. If you get easily overwhelmed, so if you're someone who gets overwhelmed very quickly, as in you need something that's slower per se and repetitious. If any of these things ring a bell for you, then Duolingo can offset these. That's what it has to offer if you're saying if it's good. What Duolingo doesn't do, if you need things to be explained explicitly, that's a big one. Explained explicitly, this is not it. Duolingo will not help, will do minimal of this. Oh, and hands-on, if you're more of a hands-on person, so just do versus know what you're doing, right? It's the counter of this. If you like to get corrected, like if you're concerned with being right all the time, then it's not Duolingo. It's not technically, it won't enforce being right. Duolingo is mistake prone, as in you make mistakes, and so potentially Duolingo does make mistakes too. It's about the habit of just doing as opposed to knowing. So we'll just focus on this stuff. So you can imagine then the not Duolingo is a lot of opposite of it. So if any of these things like fill your checklist, perhaps consider Duolingo. Otherwise, there are other tools which I can't comment on. But other tools that are not Duolingo would be LingQ, mentioned a lot. Anki isn't technically a substitution, but flashcards by means of Anki. Tae Kim's guide, if you're into like the kind of like the rigorous textbook, unadulterated kind of things. What else? Immersion, I guess. Immersion is too spurious, so I will put this in quotation because it can be anything. Anime, reading, full exposure. But Take Him, I think that's the one. Take Him can be cool. Tofuku actually has a beginner thing as well. And these are very specific to Japanese because I cannot feel comfortable in saying anything else about Duolingo. I do not know if Duolingo is useful for other contexts. Which what Duolingo doesn't offer is standardization. So what I mean by standardization is not all languages are supported the same way. So depending on, there is a dependence because no standardization. What language you're trying to learn, be careful. The only advice I can kind of make commentary on is Japanese, if that helps. That's the shortest spiel I can get without spending another 4 or 5 hours on it. All right, and that's a wrap up. Right, that's a wrap up. End of the digression. I'm gonna take a bathroom break so I know when to cut this video for tonight. And I'll be right back. And we'll get back to language learning. Thanks, guys.